In the silent, austere room of a law firm, the air felt heavy, dense with unspoken words. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Richard, impeccable in his expensive suit, a smirk of triumph barely contained on his lips. On the other side, his sister, Clara, whose heart was beating a painful rhythm against her ribs. The lawyer, an old family friend, cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding Clara's as he read the final words of the will of Arthur, the father they had both just lost. For Richard, the eldest son, the will was a cascade of gold, the family mansion, the stock portfolio, the luxury cars, the company. For Clara, the daughter who had dedicated her last years to caring for her ailing father, the inheritance was an echo, a cruel joke. To my beloved daughter, Clara, the lawyer read in a choked voice. I leave the old wooden chest that rests in the attic, and the rusty key that accompanies it. A deadly silence filled the room, broken only by Richard's stifled, disdainful laughter. For Clara, it wasn't the absence of wealth that hurt her, but the apparent contempt embedded in her father's final farewell. Clara's mind flew far from that cold room, seeking refuge in the warm days of a recent past. She remembered the afternoons spent reading to her father in the garden, his voice, though weak, following along with the stories he so loved. She remembered adjusting his pillows, bringing him his favorite soup, laughing with him while watching old black and white movies. Their love was not made of transactions, but of time, of presence, of genuine care. These were the jewels she kept in her heart. In contrast, her memories of Richard were like rare and formal photographs. Short visits, always rushed, with a phone in his hand and conversations that inevitably revolved around the value of stocks or the market potential of the family assets. He didn't see a father, he saw an estate. And Arthur, with his wise and weary gaze, seemed to know it. Money, her father once told Clara, is a wonderful servant, but a cruel master. It reveals what already exists in a man's heart. The sound of Richard's voice brought her back to the brutal reality. Well, little sister, he said, standing up and adjusting his tie, I suggest you get your treasure as soon as possible. I've had the locks on the house changed this afternoon. I don't want your dusty junk on my property. The word was spoken with a cruel force, a marking of territory that erased years of shared memories. Clara felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. That wasn't just a house, it was the home where she grew up, where every corner held a memory of her mother, her childhood, her father. Now, in a matter of hours, she was being thrown out by her own brother, treated like an intruder. The pain of her father's loss was now compounded by the pain of her brother's betrayal. She said nothing. She just nodded, swallowing the lump of tears and anger forming in her throat, and left that office with what dignity she had left and the cold, rusty key in her palm. The attic was exactly as she remembered it, silent, dusty, and full of ghosts from the past. Sunlight streamed through a small round window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. In the center of the room, covered by a white sheet, there it was, the chest. It was made of a dark, sturdy wood, with intricate carvings on the sides and hardware of a metal that had once been shiny. It was larger and heavier than she remembered. With a heavy heart, Clara pulled off the sheet, revealing the piece in all its forgotten glory. She ran her fingers over the wood, feeling the grooves and imperfections. That chest had always been a mystery. Her father had brought it back from one of his youthful journeys and had always refused to say what was inside, only that it held the beginning of everything. With tremendous effort, Clara dragged the heavy chest across the wooden floor, the sound echoing through the empty house. Every inch was a struggle, a physical burden that mirrored the weight in her soul. It was all that was left of her life, her father, her home. Back in her small, humble apartment, the chest looked like a sleeping giant in the middle of the room. For hours, Clara just watched it, postponing the moment of truth. What could possibly be inside that would justify the exclusion of everything else? Old clothes? Worthless documents? The uncertainty was almost as heavy as the chest itself. Finally, she took the rusty key. Her hands trembled as she inserted it into the ornate lock. The key went in with difficulty, scraping against the time-corroded metal. She turned it. There was a sharp, dry snap, but it wasn't the sound of a lock opening. It was the sound of the key breaking. The rusty half snapped off inside the lock, leaving the other useless half in her hand. Clara collapsed onto the floor next to the chest. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. It was the final blow. A cosmic joke. Even this last legacy, this mystery, was being denied to her. The chest, like her childhood home, was now locked to her forever. At that moment, sitting on the cold floor of her apartment, Clara felt completely and irrevocably alone. At the bottom of her despair, an image appeared in Clara's mind, the kind, smiling face of Samuel, the old locksmith whose shop was in the old part of town. Samuel was not just a locksmith, he was a craftsman, a master of antique locks, and most importantly, he had been a great friend of her father. They would spend hours talking about wood, about life, about the old days. Clara hesitated. It felt wrong to bother an elderly man with her problems. But the image of her father's disappointed face if she simply gave up spurred her on. With her heart in her throat, she found the shop's number in the phone book. When he answered, his voice was just as she remembered, calm and gentle. "Samuel? It's Clara, Arthur's daughter." There was a pause, and then Samuel's voice warmed. "Clara, my dear. How good to hear your voice. I'm so sorry about your father. He was a great man." Clara explained the situation with the chest and the broken key. "Don't you worry," Samuel said without hesitation. "I'll come right over. It will be an honor to help Arthur's daughter." Those simple words were like a balm to Clara's wounded soul. For the first time on that terrible day, a small spark of hope began to shine in the darkness. When Samuel arrived and laid eyes on the chest, a smile of recognition lit up his wrinkled face. "Ah, the chest of true treasure," he said, almost to himself. "Your father always called it that." He opened his toolbox, revealing a set of delicate, ancient instruments that seemed to belong to another era. With the patience of a monk and the skill of a surgeon, he began to work on the broken lock. As his nimble hands danced over the metal, he told stories about Arthur. Stories of his generosity, his wisdom, of how he always said that a person's character is not measured by what they have, but by what they do when they think no one is watching. Each story was a balm, rebuilding the image of her father that the cruelty of the will had tried to destroy. Clara realized that her father was not cold or indifferent. He was a strategist. He was playing one last, painful game of chess. While Clara was rediscovering her father's true legacy, Richard was diving headfirst into his. He threw an extravagant party at the mansion, the kind of event his father had always detested. The sound of loud music and empty laughter echoed through the halls where Arthur used to read in silence. Richard showed off his new acquisitions, spoke loudly about his plans to modernize his father's company, which really meant selling off parts of it to finance his impulsive lifestyle. To the fair-weather friends who surrounded him, he was the picture of success. But in his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, there was a glint of restlessness, a void that all the money in the world couldn't fill. He had the kingdom, but he was losing his soul, and deep down, he knew it. His wealth was loud, ostentatious, and profoundly lonely. Back in Clara's apartment, after what felt like an eternity, there was a sound. A metallic click, soft but definitive. Samuel stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. "There you go, my dear," he said with a tired smile. "The door to your father's treasure is open." Clara's heart raced. With trembling hands, she took hold of the heavy lid of the chest and lifted it. The smell of cedar and old paper filled the air. For a moment, disappointment threatened to return. There was no gold, no jewels, no silver bars. The chest was full of memories. Yellowed photo albums, her school report cards, her childhood drawings she thought were lost. There was her father's first hammer, small and worn. There was her mother's diary. They were treasures, yes, but the kind that don't pay the bills. With tears in her eyes, Clara began to take out the items one by one, each a key to a forgotten door in her heart. As Clara lost herself in those waves of nostalgia, feeling grateful for this final gift, her fingers touched something strange at the bottom of the chest. The velvet lining seemed loose in one corner. Curious, she pulled. To her surprise, the entire bottom of the chest moved. It was a secret compartment. And there, in the false bottom, rested two items: a leather-bound journal, with her father's initials engraved in gold, and a small blue velvet pouch, tied with a silk ribbon. Clara's heart leaped. This was different. This wasn't just memory, it was a secret. With reverent care, she picked up the journal. It was not just any journal, it was a letter. A long letter, written in her father's strong, familiar handwriting, addressed to her. The first line read, "To my dearest Clara, my true treasure." Clara began to read, and with every word, her father's plan unfolded before her with a painful and brilliant clarity. "My daughter," Arthur had written, "forgive me for the pain I have caused you. The public will was a final test, a mirror I needed to hold up to your brother. I knew his heart had been poisoned by greed, and I left him the money, the poison he so craved, so that the world would see his true character. The money would test him, and I knew he would fail. But for you, I left something far more valuable. The legacy. The wealth that cannot be spent, but that can be cultivated. The chest holds our memories, for without knowing where we come from, we cannot know where we are going. But what is in this secret compartment are the seeds of your future." With hands still trembling from the emotion of the letter, Clara opened the small blue velvet pouch. Inside, there were no diamonds or gold coins. There were seeds. Small, dark, and ordinary looking, but they seemed to pulse with a latent energy. Along with the seeds, in the compartment, were documents, the deeds to a vast expanse of land in a rural area, land that Richard had dismissed as useless and unproductive, and the botanical patents in the name of Clara's grandfather. Her father's letter explained everything. Her grandfather had been a brilliant botanist who had discovered and bred a nearly extinct species of tree whose fruit had extraordinary medicinal properties. The seeds in the pouch were the last of their kind. The useless land was, in fact, the only biome in the country where these trees could flourish. The true fortune was not the money in the bank, it was the potential contained in those small seeds, a living, sustainable wealth that could change the world. Karma, like gravity, is an inevitable force. Richard's fortune, built on greed and a lack of vision, began to crumble. His impulsive investments failed. His expensive parties left him in debt. The fair-weather friends disappeared as soon as the money began to dry up. In desperation, he tried to sell off the last of his assets, including the useless land that had belonged to his father. That's when he discovered the truth. Lawyers from a large pharmaceutical corporation and botanical institutes approached him, not for the land itself, but for what could be grown on it. But the value of the land was intrinsically linked to the patents and the seeds, which, they informed him, belonged by right to his sister, Clara. Richard was livid. He ran to Clara's apartment, demanding, begging, trying to intimidate her into sharing her luck. But the woman he found was not the same fragile sister he had humiliated. Clara, standing tall, calm and strong, looked him in the eye and said, "Simply, you made your choice, Richard. Now, I will make mine." Clara did not use her inheritance to build a life of luxury, but rather to honor the legacy of her father and grandfather. With the help of Samuel and experts who were inspired by her story, she created the Arthur's Seeds Foundation. She transformed the land into a botanical sanctuary, cultivating the rare trees and using their fruits to develop affordable medicines and reforestation programs. Her wealth was not in yachts or mansions, but in the green of the leaves, the buzzing of the bees, the faces of the people her work helped. She didn't just become successful, she became significant. Richard, on the other hand, lost everything. His story became a cautionary tale in the city about how greed blinds and destroys. He ended up exactly as his father had predicted, alone, with the empty memory of a fortune that had slipped through his hands like sand. The story of Clara and Richard teaches us a profound lesson about the true value of things. Often, in the search for what glitters, we ignore what flourishes. The true inheritance is not what we receive in bank accounts, but the values we cultivate. In our hearts, loyalty, compassion, resilience, and the ability to see a treasure where others only see an old chest. Clara's father did not leave her a fortune, but rather an opportunity and the wisdom to recognize it. He knew that true wealth is not owned, but created. And what about you? What do you consider your greatest treasure? Have you ever found inestimable value where no one else saw it? If this story touched your heart and made you reflect, show your support by clicking the like button. Subscribe to our channel, Stories That Inspire, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next moving journeys. Share in the comments what lesson you learned from this story. A warm hug, and see you in the next video.